Hello, my name is Apple and you are listening to AppleKnows channel. Today I am taking you into a world where water meets wood, steel, and human imagination. We are talking about boats, but not in the way you might expect. These are facts so strange and fascinating that you will find yourself questioning how they could possibly be true. Let's begin with something that sounds like a myth but is entirely real. There exists a boat that is older than the pyramids of Egypt. The Khufu ship, discovered buried next to the Great Pyramid at Giza, dates back more than 4,600 years. It is so well preserved that archaeologists could even see the wooden planks tied together with rope. Imagine that, a boat built before paper money, before iron tools, even before much of written history, still sitting in front of us today. Now think about this. Some boats are so massive that when they are launched into the water, the waves they create can cause small tsunamis. One example is the supertanker Seawise Giant, once the largest moving object ever built by humans. At over 450 meters long, it was longer than the Empire State Building is tall. Its weight was so great that the anchor alone weighed more than 30 cars. Yet despite this, it floated and moved across oceans as if defying the rules of physics. Here is something that will shock you. During World War II, engineers experimented with building boats out of ice. Yes, ice. The project was called Habakkuk, and the idea was to create unsinkable aircraft carriers made from a mixture of ice and wood pulp, which was surprisingly bullet-resistant. Winston Churchill himself supported this idea. In Canada, they even built a prototype on a lake, and it lasted for months without melting. Imagine if those had been fully built, giant floating ice fortresses patrolling the oceans. But let's step away from military secrets for a moment. Did you know there is a floating post office? In India, on Dal Lake in Srinagar, there is an actual boat that functions as a post office, complete with stamps and letters being sorted while gently rocking on the water. It is not a tourist attraction made for show, but a real working post office serving locals every day. That is how versatile boats can be, from carrying emperors to carrying your mail. And here is a fact that many people cannot believe. The oldest known canoe ever discovered is more than 10,000 years old. Found in the Netherlands, it proves that humans were mastering water travel at the dawn of civilization. To put that in perspective, this boat was being used when mammoths still roamed parts of the earth. Picture a person carving a canoe with stone tools while the Ice Age was ending, and that same canoe lying preserved for us to see today. The mysteries of boats do not end with history. Modern technology has also created things that sound unreal. Take the Japanese floating solar farms. They are built on top of reservoirs, with solar panels covering the water like a vast futuristic raft. These floating systems produce energy while also reducing evaporation from the water below. A boat, in a sense, has turned into a floating power station. Now let's talk about something darker. There are more shipwrecks on the bottom of the ocean than there are airplanes in the sky at any moment. Estimates suggest there are over 3 million shipwrecks scattered across the oceans, many still undiscovered. Some carry treasures of gold and silver, others hold forgotten history, and some are even declared underwater graves, protected from disturbance. Every time you sail over the sea, you are most likely floating above the remains of ancient boats lost to storms, wars, and human error. And if you think that is chilling, consider this. There is a boat graveyard in Staten Island, New York, where hundreds of rusting ships have been abandoned and left to rot. Locals call it the boat graveyard, and walking through it feels like stepping into a post-apocalyptic movie. Each wreck has its own story, some were tugboats, some ferries, some military ships. Now they sit in silence, slowly being reclaimed by nature. Boats have been prisons, homes, theaters, even floating palaces. The Venetian gondolas, for example, are built with exactly 280 separate pieces of wood and take months to construct, each angle perfected by hand. And for centuries they were painted entirely black, not for style, but because a 16th century law demanded it, to stop rich families from competing with each other in extravagant boat decorations. One of the strangest boats ever built was the Great Eastern, designed in the 19th century by Isambard Kingdom Brunel. It was so massive and advanced for its time that people were terrified of it. At nearly 700 feet long, it could carry 4,000 passengers across the world without refueling, which was unheard of then. But here's the twist: during its construction, workers reported hearing mysterious knocking and cries from inside the hull. Decades later, when the ship was finally dismantled, they found a skeleton sealed inside the iron plates, a worker who had been trapped alive during the building process. Imagine the horror of that discovery. Here's another fact that feels impossible. In China, there is a floating bridge made entirely of boats. It stretches across a river and has been used for centuries. The boats are tied side by side, planks laid across them, and entire armies once marched over these floating bridges. It is both engineering brilliance and a reminder of how humans have always found a way to tame water. And speaking of taming water, did you know about the ship of Theseus paradox brought to life? In Japan, there are boats that have been rebuilt and repaired piece by piece for so many generations that not a single original part remains, yet they are still considered the same vessel. It forces us to ask, at what point does a boat stop being the original boat? Or is the idea of the boat more important than the material itself? Now let me take you somewhere surreal. There is a phenomenon called boat lift engineering, and one of the most bizarre examples is the Falkirk wheel in Scotland. It is the world's only rotating boat lift. Imagine a giant Ferris wheel, but instead of carrying people, it carries entire boats, lifting them from one canal to another with almost no energy wasted. It looks like something from the future, yet it has been working flawlessly since 2002. But here is a darker and more unbelievable truth. Some boats have been found at the tops of mountains. How? During the great floods and massive tsunamis in history, entire ships were carried inland and left stranded miles from the sea. The most famous example is the so-called Noah's Ark site on Mount Ararat in Turkey, where explorers have claimed to see wooden remains of a massive ship. While debates continue, we do know that history records countless ships deposited far inland after cataclysmic floods, evidence of nature's brutal power. And speaking of strange placements, did you know there are boat hotels where you can sleep in luxury on ships that will never sail again? In Amsterdam and Stockholm, decommissioned ferries and cruise ships have been turned into permanent floating hotels, blending the romance of the sea with the comfort of land. But the eerie part is walking the silent halls of a ship that once carried thousands across dangerous waters, now frozen in time. Some boats were even designed to sink on purpose. In Venice, engineers created batia boats that were filled with stones and deliberately sunk to serve as foundations for buildings. Yes, the famous city of Venice literally stands on an army of sunken boats buried under the canals. That fact alone makes you see the city in an entirely new way. And finally, for now, let me give you this chilling statistic. The Titanic is not the deadliest ship disaster in history. Most people believe it was, but in reality, the German ship Wilhelm Gustloff, sunk in 1945, killed over 9,000 people, mostly civilians and refugees. That is more than 5 times the Titanic's toll, yet few people outside of historians know about it. Sometimes the ocean does not just hide boats, it hides memories the world chooses to forget. Did you know there are boats that never touch the water? They are called hovercrafts, and they ride on a cushion of air, skimming over rivers, seas, even swamps. The largest ever built, the Soviet Zubr-class hovercraft, can carry tanks and hundreds of troops across the sea at highway speeds. Watching one glide onto a beach looks like something out of a science fiction invasion, a boat that doesn't float but flies just above the surface. Now let's go back in time. The Vikings had ships so advanced that modern engineers still marvel at them. Their longships could sail across oceans but also travel up shallow rivers, giving Vikings the terrifying ability to appear out of nowhere in the heart of Europe. One fact that shocks historians is that Viking ships were built with such precision that no 2 planks were the same shape, each was carved to fit uniquely into the hull, almost like a giant 3D puzzle. Without nails, without blueprints, they built vessels strong enough to cross the Atlantic. Here is something even stranger. There are boats made entirely of reeds that have sailed across oceans. Thor Heyerdahl proved this in 1947 with the Kon-Tiki expedition, where he and his team built a raft using only ancient techniques. They sailed from South America to Polynesia to show that ancient civilizations could have crossed vast oceans long before modern ships. The journey took over 100 days, but the raft survived storms, sharks, and the endless Pacific. That one expedition rewrote how historians think about human exploration. But not all boats are for travel. Some are for survival. During World War II, lifeboats were sometimes equipped with bizarre tools to trick the mind. British lifeboats carried tiny books of jokes, crosswords, and even cigarette packs, not because they were essential, but because they kept stranded sailors from losing their sanity while floating for weeks in the open sea. A detail so small, yet it saved lives. Let me take you to a very different boat, the luxury kind. The yacht History Supreme is considered the most expensive boat in the world, valued at over $4.5 billion. What makes it so costly? It is coated with 100,000 kilograms of gold and platinum, and even has a wall made from meteorite rock and a sculpture carved from a T-Rex bone. This sounds like a fantasy, yet it is real, a floating palace of pure extravagance. And here's a fact that will twist your mind. Some boats are designed to flip upside down and keep working. Rescue boats used in stormy seas are built so that if a giant wave turns them over, they automatically roll back upright. It means the boat can never truly capsize, a clever design that has saved countless lives in the roughest waters. There's also a boat in Paris that doubles as a swimming pool. The Piscine Josephine Baker is a floating barge on the Seine River converted into a public pool. People swim in crystal clear water while the river flows right beneath them, a mix of luxury, engineering, and a touch of surrealism. But nothing compares to this. Deep below Lake Titicaca in South America, archaeologists discovered ancient boat remains alongside temples and offerings, all submerged. This proves that civilizations thousands of years ago used boats on that lake long before modern history even recognized their existence. A hidden underwater world, where boats were part of both travel and sacred rituals. And finally, let me drop this on you, the ocean floor holds the remains of nuclear-powered submarines that were lost during the Cold War. These are boats carrying reactors and sometimes even nuclear weapons, lying silently in the dark. They are not only wrecks but ticking time capsules of one of the tensest periods in human history, resting where no one can see them. There is a boat that moves without touching the water's surface in the traditional sense. It's called a hydrofoil. When it gains speed, wings beneath the hull lifted above the waves, reducing drag and allowing incredible speeds. In fact, the world's fastest recorded boat, the Spirit of Australia, used hydroplane technology to reach over 318 miles per hour. That's faster than a Formula One car on water. At those speeds, the smallest wave could destroy everything, yet people have risked their lives to push the limits of what a boat can do. Now here's something eerie. During the Vietnam War, the U.S. Navy used swift boats for river patrols. These boats were small and fast, but what shocked soldiers most was how silent the rivers became when they cut their engines. Floating in total darkness, surrounded by jungle, crews reported hearing whispers and movements they couldn't explain. Many believed the rivers themselves carried spirits, and to this day veterans speak of the haunting silence that fell whenever their boats stopped moving. And then we have the strangest material ever considered for building boats, concrete. Yes, there are concrete ships. During both World Wars, when steel was scarce, engineers built massive vessels from reinforced concrete. They actually worked, floating across oceans while carrying heavy cargo. Some of them still exist, abandoned on beaches or turned into docks, silent monuments to an idea that sounds impossible, ships of stone. Let's not forget boats that live inside mountains. In Norway, during the Cold War, entire naval bases were carved into rock, allowing submarines and ships to hide inside massive underground caverns. These secret boat caves are still in use, some large enough to swallow entire warships whole, invisible to satellites and safe from attack. Here's another truth that's hard to believe. In Cambodia, on the Tunnel Sap Lake, there are entire floating villages. Families live their entire lives on boats and floating houses, schools, shops, churches, even basketball courts exist on water. Some people there are born, grow up, marry, and die without ever setting foot on solid land. For them, the boat is not just transport, it is life itself. But history has even more bizarre examples. In the 18th century, pirates used ships that were deceptively small but carried massive hidden firepower. One famous pirate trick was the false flag, approaching under the flag of a friendly nation, only to raise the skull and crossbones at the last second and unleash cannons. The boat itself became a weapon of psychological warfare. Now let's enter the world of the unexplainable. In 1872, the Mary Celeste was found adrift in the Atlantic Ocean, perfectly seaworthy, with all its cargo intact, food on the table, and belongings untouched. But the crew was gone. No signs of struggle, no evidence of where they went, just a ghost ship left behind. To this day, the Mary Celeste remains one of the greatest maritime mysteries, a boat without its people, floating silently. And speaking of ghost ships, there are vessels that appear and disappear across generations. The Flying Dutchman is the most famous legend, a phantom ship said to sail endlessly, never docking, a cursed vessel seen by sailors for centuries. What makes this unsettling is that there are actual documented accounts of experienced captains claiming to see a glowing ship vanish into mist, not just once, but multiple times across different oceans. But let me give you one last fact for now that shows how far boats go beyond imagination. There is a boat orbiting in space. Yes, in 2010, Japanese scientists launched a solar sail spacecraft called Icaros. It isn't a boat on water but a spaceboat using sunlight as wind. It proves that the concept of a boat, a vessel carried by invisible currents, is not limited to Earth at all. Let's start with something that bends the rules of nature. In China, there is a river where boats appear to sail uphill. It's an optical illusion created by the surrounding landscape, but when you watch it, it looks as if water is flowing backward and boats are climbing a slope against gravity. Tourists and even locals are left stunned, wondering if the river is cursed or enchanted, when in reality it's simply the power of perspective. Now imagine this. There are boats buried in deserts. In Kazakhstan, near the dried-up Aral Sea, you can walk across sand and stumble upon entire fishing boats stranded far from water. What was once one of the largest lakes in the world has shrunk dramatically due to human activity, leaving behind a surreal landscape of rusting ships resting in dunes, a haunting reminder of how quickly nature can change. And here's a military secret most people never learn. During the Cold War, the United States created a boat disguised as a rock. It was part of Project Azorian, an effort to recover a sunken Soviet submarine. Engineers built a giant recovery ship, but to conceal the mission, they designed sections that looked like part of the seafloor. From above, the boat looked like natural rock formations. Underneath, it was one of the most ambitious espionage projects ever attempted. Let's step back in history. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt believed boats were the vehicles of the afterlife. They buried entire ships near their tombs so that the soul could sail across the heavens. The Khufu ship I mentioned earlier is one of these, but there are others still hidden underground, waiting to be unearthed. These were not just boats, they were spiritual spacecraft for a journey after death. Here's another truth that sounds unreal. Some boats carry entire ecosystems. In the Amazon, indigenous people build floating islands out of tightly woven vegetation, which slowly become living boats. They sprout plants, host insects, even attract birds, yet they can still be steered like rafts. It's as if the earth itself decided to grow a vessel. And then there's the strangest port in the world. In Seattle, there's a place called the Ballard Locks where boats don't just pass through, they climb staircases of water. The locks raise or lower vessels between different sea levels, and when you see it for the first time, it looks as if massive ships are levitating. Thousands of tons of steel rising gently like an elevator, the sea itself being reshaped to move a boat. But nothing compares to this chilling fact. During the 17th century, plague ships were left abandoned at sea. When disease swept through a crew, some captains chose to cut the ropes at port and push the infected vessel back into open waters, leaving everyone aboard to die. These ships drifted for weeks, sometimes months, before washing ashore with only skeletons left. Imagine being the one who first spotted such a ghostly vessel approaching your harbor. And here's something stranger still. The oldest known depiction of a boat is not on paper or stone, but carved into cave walls. Archaeologists discovered boat drawings over 12,000 years old in Kuwait, showing humans understood water travel even before the invention of the wheel. Boats, in a sense, are humanity's first great machines. Let's begin with this. Some boats are not just machines, they are living time capsules. In the Black Sea, deep underwater where there is no oxygen, shipwrecks thousands of years old remain preserved as if they sank yesterday. Wooden beams, ropes, even carvings are intact. This part of the ocean is like a freezer for history, hiding fleets from the Greeks, Byzantines, and Ottomans in perfect condition. Archaeologists call it the closest thing to a maritime museum nature ever created, except it's all locked away in the dark. Now, here's a fact few people know. During World War II, Japan built the largest submarines ever constructed, the I-400 class. But they weren't just submarines, they were underwater aircraft carriers, designed to surface, launch planes to bomb American cities, then vanish beneath the waves. Each carried 3 bombers folded inside watertight hangars. The war ended before they were used, but the very idea still feels like a nightmare pulled into reality. But boats don't just appear in oceans. In South America, Bolivia has a navy despite being landlocked. After losing access to the sea in a war, they kept their navy alive, training on Lake Titicaca with real ships. It's the only navy in the world that exists without an ocean, and it shows how deeply boats are tied to identity and pride. Now imagine a boat designed to last forever. In Finland, there is a concept called the nuclear waste coffin ship, a vessel intended to one day transport radioactive materials safely for thousands of years. Engineers had to design it to survive storms, collisions, and even future societies that might not understand its danger. It is not just a boat, it is a warning to the future, sailing with death sealed inside. And here's a chilling one. The most heavily guarded boat in history is not a warship but a barge that carries the crown jewels of England when they move along the Thames. It is called the Royal Nowhere, and whenever it sails, the security is so intense that the entire river is locked down. Snipers, hidden patrol boats, and surveillance helicopters guard a single vessel carrying treasure worth billions. For those hours, the river becomes a fortress. But boats have also been used for darker experiments. In the 1950s, the U.S. military tested nuclear weapons on decommissioned ships during Operation Crossroads. Entire fleets were anchored near Bikini Atoll and blasted with atomic bombs to study the effects. The haunting part is that many of those irradiated vessels were later towed back to harbors, glowing with contamination, slowly dismantled by workers who didn't even know the risks. Now let's go back in time. The Romans built boats so large they were essentially floating palaces. Emperor Caligula had ships on Lake Nemi that carried marble floors, heating systems, and temples. These boats were more luxurious than many royal castles. For centuries, people thought the stories were exaggerated until the lake was drained in the 20th century and the remains of the giant ships were found, proving the legends true. And speaking of legends proven real, there's the Uluburun shipwreck, found off the coast of Turkey. It sank over 3,000 years ago, yet when divers explored it, they found cargo from at least 7 different civilizations: copper, tin, ivory, glass, and even Egyptian jewelry. This single boat revealed that globalization existed long before modern history even recognized it. Finally, let me give you a fact that unsettles even experts. Every day, ships vanish into what sailors call the ocean's black holes. These are massive whirlpools and unpredictable waves known as rogue waves, towering walls of water that strike without warning. Satellite data proves they can reach heights of over 80 feet, enough to swallow entire ships instantly. To those aboard, it's as if the sea itself rose up to erase them. This is Apple from AppleKnows channel, and now we've reached the end of our voyage together. We've uncovered boats older than pyramids, ships that vanished without a trace, vessels made of ice, concrete, and even gold. We've looked at ghost stories, engineering marvels, and the haunting truth that millions of wrecks still rest beneath the sea. Boats are not just tools of travel, they are time machines, cultural icons, mysteries, and warnings from history. Every boat tells a story, whether it carried kings, refugees, explorers, or ghosts. And every fact we've explored proves one thing: the ocean always keeps its secrets, but boats are the keys that help us glimpse them, if only for a moment. Thank you for listening. This was Apple from AppleKnows channel, and remember, the next time you see a boat, you're not just looking at a vessel. You're looking at a story that could outlive us all.